Earlier in this series of Bob Into Buildings, we spoke to Mark Savage about the design of the energy from waste plant. Savage and Chadwick were also project architects for the NSC and the MEA buildings in Pulrose. Did they tender for the MEA complex, I asked Mark.
We were approached by the MEA to design their power station. They asked us to design the building from the start, and they asked us to start with a concept of a building that was striking and giving something back to Douglas, because it is in a sort of urban environment, and unusually for a power station, and it's usually on the edge of an industrial estate somewhere. So that was our brief, really, and from then the brief kind of developed in various different directions, and we were asked if we would design a building that was transparent, so you could see the engineering internally and celebrate the engineering internally if you want. I think that was the phrase that was used. As far as I know, that had never been done before, and it's probably never been done since. But we managed it. Technical challenges such as noise breakout, solar gain, maintenance, all those sorts of things were quite challenging, but we managed it. We met the brief in the end. It was probably about a 4-year project.
It's a great chunk of a building, isn't it?
Yeah.
But first of all, as we discussed with the incinerator, you've got to find out what goes inside, and then you've got to put a shell around it.
That's right. In this case, what was going inside was 2 gas turbines that would generate 85 megawatts of power, and it was also linked to the undersea cable connector, so power could be fed both ways. It could be taken from the national grid or be fed to the national grid. Fast response gas turbines, which these are, were capable of short notice supply, and as I understand it, the national grid would contact the MEA, have you any spare power, and they would feed it back down the line. So that was fairly significant in the process, and we then took the size of those units and we designed around them, but we had to design it with the engineers, the process engineers, very similar to the incinerator, where we worked with the engineers rather than taking what they produced and adapting the building to suit. So consequently, we didn't let them blow holes in the side of the roof and the walls, because we didn't want to see those. We didn't want to see equipment protruding from them, and we managed it for the most part. So yeah, you do start from inside out with a building like this, because it is highly serviced.
All of a sudden then you've got exactly what you want on the inside,
Yeah.
and you've then got to put this shell around it. How far away from the building do you look at it to think, yeah, we could do that there and with it, because you've got 4 elevations of the building?
You have, and our brief just didn't extend to 4 elevations of a building, it extended to the chimney as well. But unusually, the power station is viewed from quite close by. Normally these buildings are so large that they're separate from everywhere else, and you can see them from half a mile away. For this, it was a matter of a few hundred yards at most, so people were able to see into the building, and therefore you were able to celebrate some of the architecture as well as the engineering inside. And then a brief extended to the flues, which was not just the 2 gas turbine flues, they were the existing diesel flues. Well, as the diesel plant still runs from that time to time as backup, and there's 4 diesel engines there, so there's 6 flues to accommodate, all of which were hefty enough diameter. And how do you make that elegant? So we dispensed with the original or the traditional slip foam concrete solution, and we surrounded the flues in a stainless steel mesh, which then rose to a spire at the top, which again, as far as I'm aware, has never been done before or since.
That, I was admiring it only yesterday when I went down the recycling plant.
Yeah.
It is a very attractive flue, isn't it?
It is, and again quite technically challenging, because what the MEA, as they were then, wanted to do was connect their new 85 megawatt power station to their existing control room, which was extended on the size of the diesel station. And in the way of that was the new flue, so we put a walkway right through the middle of it. I don't think you can see it from the road, but if you look closely, you'll see it there, that there's a walkway going at high level from one building to the next and penetrating the flue at low level, below the level that the flues actually turn and go upward. So quite challenging, really.
The curved roof. A lot of buildings now have these curved roofs.
Yes.
I'm assuming that flat roofs have problems.
Flat roofs do have problems. A flat roof isn't ever a flat roof in the sense that it's always got a minimum pitch of a fall. Monopitched roofs we could have used, but I think more elegantly a curved roof probably does the job. And because we used a standing seam aluminium covering and we rolled those sheets out at high level in a rolling machine which takes the raw aluminium at one end, profiles it through a roller, and then you go straight onto the roof, so it's seamless. And as it's seamless, it's about as waterproof as you can possibly get. So that was quite a challenge too, and that worked quite well. And then we have a monopitch going the other direction towards the NSC end of the building, so the two complement each other quite nicely.
Bet you the brickies loved you because you gave them curved lines to work to as well.
Yeah, they did. I remember it well. It wasn't just curves. The external glazing is sloped outwards to minimise solar gain. So there was a diminishing parapet between the bottom and the top of the building, and then of course the brickies had to work to a curved profile at the top. But nonetheless, I think it looks pretty well when you drive past it now. It looks pretty crisp and sharp.
Whose decision for brickwork as compared with presumably render?
It was the MEAs actually. It was their existing station was brickwork. Brickwork is a low maintenance material. The last thing we want to do is render something you had to paint and clean. And brickwork is generally self-cleaning as long as you choose the right brick. So it was maintenance as much as anything, but also appearance because it blended in with what was there already.
And you got flush joints as well, so that helps the cleaning as well.
It does, yeah.
So we come to the glass.
Yes.
You keep saying about zero heat. Presumably this is to protect the people who work inside and to protect the machinery from the rays of the sun.
It is. The machinery itself generates heat, as you can imagine, and if we take that heat with what are pretty much 30-metre high glass walls at the highest point, and the solar gain from that would be unbearable inside, so you'd be generating electricity to cool something, which doesn't make any sense. So what we did was design the outer pane to slope outwards. The inner pane is vertical. There are maintenance platforms in between if you look closely, and the outward leaning pane stops solar gain because there's no direct sunlight penetration. The inner space between the two panes is actually ventilated naturally at bottom and top, so air is drawn in and then expelled at the top, which then keeps that space cool. So the whole thing has a cooling effect without it costing any money to generate cooling.
What thickness of glass is it?
It's relatively thin. I think the planar, which is the product, I think the planar thicknesses were 10 mil, something like that, 10 to 15 mil, because the whole thing is supported by rod rigging, which is a work of art in itself. The designers of that were needed a pat on the back because that needed an awful lot of detail, but it's constantly supporting the glazing on spiders at each glazing junction. And as a result, your glazing thickness can be kept reasonably thin.
I'm assuming with the main chunk of glass sloping outwards, is it self-cleaning as well?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
So you haven't got a guy to go up there every week and clean the glass?
No. And if they do have to clean the glass, there are maintenance platforms inside, so they can do that relatively easily. It's a fairly easily maintainable building.
And I'm assuming you drive by it on a regular basis?
I understand from the people that visit my office that the taxi drivers have a bit of a route that takes you past the power station, past the NSC and past the incinerator, and they point them out one by one. As we've designed all three, we're quite proud of that.
So you were saying then to move on to the NSC building,
yes,
which is once again a chunk of a building on the ground.
Yes.
And the elevation's quite complicated on that one.
They are quite complicated. Again, they're curved roofs. The most complicated elevation is the wet leisure end, which was phase one, whereby at that time we couldn't design what's called a warm roof. We had to design a ventilated roof because warm roofs were at that stage not accepted by the industry. They are today. So the steps in the roof, it's curving in two directions. It's got quite heavy roof lights in it. They've got ups and downs. The whole roof structure is and was very, very complex to design. As it moves through its phases, so the dry, the atrium, the dry leisure, the main sports hall and bowls hall and smaller sports hall, squash courts, the roofs get easier because they're in easier construction and they're generally monopitches, although albeit curved.
Access appeared to have been a problem. A lot of steps.
It is a problem in the sense that where you want to access a public building such as that is on the first floor, because all your changing and ancillary facilities tend to be on ground floor. So we had to manipulate the levels into that building to get you in at a half level up and then a half level again. So when you walk through the main atrium doors, you're on first floor level. That allows the whole of the ground floor to be utilised for the changing and ancillary facilities that it should be.
One of the big problems was the water levels. Obviously, flooding has caused recently some problems.
Yes.
Was that taken into consideration when you did the design?
It was. There were flood barriers. We didn't actually do the first phase because the first phase was not the building. It was the outdoor track and outdoor centre. And they built a flood level into that. But there were certain flood defences that were part of the NSC building development that are still there now. Again, the water levels were higher than expected. So what we've since had to do is built in some local flood protection to all the key openings so that if this ever happens again, the building is fully protected.
Mark from Savage and Chadwick talking about the MEA buildings and the NSC buildings, speaking now to Paul Bryson about the many facilities that are now available at the NSC.
We'll start on the outdoor facilities. We have the AstroTurf pitch, which is predominantly used for hockey and football. The athletics track, which, as it says on the tin, it is for athletics. A full-size 3G football stadium, which is previously known as the Bowl, predominantly used for football, but with a little bit of rugby as well, because the length of the pile of the 3G surface is suitable for football and rugby, and the length of the pile for the AstroTurf is suitable for hockey and football.
Do you still do the walk and talks?
Yep, absolutely. So that happens on a Tuesday and a Friday here around the athletics track. So yeah, as well as the athletics sort of track training is the health and well-being for the old generation, which is a key part of our strategy. And that's now been going for about 19 years. It started at the NSC with a small group of 3 or 4 people set up by my colleague Gianni Epifani, and he's done a marvellous job developing that. It's now an all-island type activity, so it happens in Peel, Castletown and Ramsey as well as the NSC. So yeah, that's been really successful. And of course we have the raceway road around the athletics track, which is a half a mile circuit for people to casually, recreationally sort of walk and run and cycle. And then obviously we have the children's cycling, and we have Bike for Life, which is a disability cycling activity.
None of that has been involved in the current works that are going on here at the NSC. As far as you are concerned, you had the big flood, which caused all kinds of problems. Is that when you had to sort of have a rethink?
Yeah, I mean, December 2015, I remember it quite well, strangely enough. Obviously not expected, didn't really have a contingency plan in place for something like that. These things happen and you don't really think about it until they happen, and then you have to solve numerous problems. How do you displace and move existing hirers? How does the sporting infrastructure and the provision continue when facilities are out of action? I mean, the flood affected the outdoor and indoor facilities. The only place where water didn't get into was the swimming pool, ironically enough. Everywhere else was flooded. A couple of years ago, we've put in place new a new AstroTurf facility, which is predominantly used by hockey, and there was some modifications to the track and indeed the bowl. Brand new sports hall, squash courts, bowls hall. So we've had all that kind of work from between December 2015 and about September 2016.
Did you have to rethink the swimming pool?
Not drastically, because a swimming pool is a swimming pool predominantly. It is that it kind of does what it says, which is a tank of water that people swim in. But what we did do is we looked at our customer base, and we looked at the improvements we could make, and in particular we wanted to enhance the experience for people with disabilities. We wanted to enhance the experience for those people who struggle to get in and out of the pool in terms of steps, or people in wheelchair users. We wanted to improve the flexibility of the space that we had. So we have got rid of one floating, complete movable floor and replaced it with two separate movable floors. So within one half of the pool, we can have one depth and another half a different depth, whereas previously it had to be the same depth across the whole way. The benefits of that are for school swimming. The benefits are for our swimming lessons. Deep water aquafit, shallow water aquafit. So depending upon the user group, in the same area we can have a different challenge, if you like, or a different depth, which is most suits the needs and the requirements of those that are using it. In order to pay for that, of course, we had to change and take the part movable floor away from what is effectively the lane swimming pool. So that used to have a third of the area the floor could move. So you'd have shallow water then into a fixed depth deep area. That's now one complete fixed depth, because we had to make a decision around what's the most effective use of the spend in terms of the budget that we have for the project, and we felt that wasn't the most effective use. So we had to think about things like that. We had to consider the changing areas and the needs now of people compared to 20 years ago. We've increased the number of showers, we've increased the number of accessible toilets, particularly for people with disabilities. We've changed the size and slightly the layout of the changing village and the cubicles. In the leisure pool to sea, we've included a zero depth wet play area, and that's a section really that we weren't really catering for in society. So that would be your sort of 0 to 3 or 4 year olds. So you've obviously got the pool for people who can swim, the flumes and the whirlpool area for kind of what I call young children, but not the very young. So you could argue we weren't catering for that very small child in terms of an entertainment experience in a pool. These are children who can't yet swim, can barely just walk, but there's something exciting and innovative about tipping buckets and sprays and small little slides, and in an area that was pretty much redundant, really. It was just like a seating area that was not really that well used, and so we really looked at that and sort of said, how can we better use that space? So yes, when we looked at the improvements we could make, I think the outcome is we're very pleased with what we've got, and indeed very pleased with what we're going to get.
Because the trouble is always with getting out of swimming pools, it's usually a vertical ladder. But now you've made access a lot easier. But also, I notice an equipment on the side which lowers wheelchairs into the pool.
Yeah. So if we take the steps that gradually go into the pool, you're right, Bob. That previously they were vertical, built into the side of the pool tank, and if you were kind of fit and young and flexible, that you could get in and out of the pool quite easily, just like yourself.
Yeah.
But if that was not possible, it was a struggle for people, and we recognise this. So we've got these movable stainless steel steps which will gradually go into the pool. Of course, the advantage is that people can get in and out of the water much more easily. The disadvantage, it takes a chunk of your pool away. So there's always a compromise, and there's always we solve one problem, but we create another one somewhere else. So that chunk of space that it takes up, has a compromising impact on the space that we've got available for school swimming lessons, for swimming squad sessions. So we now have to take those steps out at certain times to accommodate those issues. In terms of the other piece of kit, new kit, next to those sliding gradual staircase is the pool pod. This is a very sophisticated piece of engineering in which a wheelchair user can be wheeled onto a platform, and through the touch of a button that platform hovers just across the top of the pool and then gradually lowers the person with a disability who's a wheelchair user into the water, and then they can go and swim, and indeed the same thing happens for them to get out of the pool. So we've made huge strides in improvements in that area as well.
There's more to the NSC than the swimming pool. One of the areas, as you said, was the squash courts.
Yes.
And they were particularly well damaged by the flood.
Yeah, in fact we had 6 small swimming pools down the squash courts, so the water was up to around people's knees, if you for want of a better expression. So they've all been completely replaced, redone, and 6 brand new courts, and they're all glass back courts that have been replaced. Now we're talking about the floods, is that we've spent a significant amount of money on a flood-proof system of barriers, gates, doors, that when we get an alarm or we feel that there's the potential for a flood, that these barriers go into place, and it will kind of keeps the building waterproof, or certainly limits the huge amount of water that comes into the building. Of course, we can't do much about the water table if it comes up through the floor, but we certainly can stop it coming through doorways and entrances and exits.
And you've got the health facility still on the ground floor?
Yeah, we have the fitness zone, which is the gym upstairs and the spa, jacuzzi and sauna downstairs, well used. We have a target group, if you like, of that we don't compete with the private sector for those, what I would call the fit gym, the stereotypical gym user. Our target audience is those with poor health, and those who come through our referral programs, whether that be through physical or mental health, whether that come for people who need to lose weight, instead of perhaps taking medication. Exercise is a better prescription for, so yeah, I mean, and indeed the more elderly in society, if you were to go into our gym, I think you'd see a cross section that you wouldn't normally perhaps see in one of the private gyms on the island, and that's, I think that's right. Government shouldn't compete with the private sector. Their target audience is a group that they're working with, and that's their business, and that's not for us to interfere with or to compete against. Ours is to identify the gaps and the provision that the private sector don't pick up. Indeed, that's kind of what we do.
Are people noticing the differences?
In terms of the developments that have happened?
Yeah, the recent, this is good, isn't it? This is brilliant.
I hope so.
You've got a big wall with customer feedback.
Yeah, I normally only get to hear from people who are not happy or disillusioned or dissatisfied, and my job is to try and make them as happy as I can possibly make them and solve whatever problems that they have. And of course, one of our ethos or values, if you like, is that that we provide as the best service as we possibly can. And sadly, not many people tell you the good things that you're doing particularly well, or the nice bits. But yeah, we've had some great feedback. Of course, we have from our regular hirers and users, and I think they recognise the investment that the government has put into this facility. We are very lucky. I've always said, most interviews that I do, we are very, very lucky on the Isle of Man that our government funds these facilities and these activities. If you went to many places throughout the United Kingdom, that would not be the case to the level and the standard that we've got here. We've got a facility that everyone who comes over from the UK, whether that be visitors, whether that be sports people, they always say to me, wow, this is amazing. Sadly, some of our perhaps local residents haven't made that comparison because they haven't visited some sports centres and leisure centres in the UK, but we are very fortunate that we've had a government that's seen the value and invested, if you like, in the health and well-being of this generation and indeed future generations. Because you remove that provision or you don't have those facilities, participation goes down. Its physical inactivity goes up. The likelihood is diabetes, type 2 diabetes goes up. The likelihood is the onset of coronary heart disease goes up. Obesity, etc., etc. So we're more than, I think, just a sports centre where what I would call actual, sport, competitive sport takes place. We are quite a bit more than that.
The car park remains the same?
The car park does remain the same. We are making some improvements to the parking bays for disabled users out the front. They will be bigger, and there will be some improvements to the drop curbs and indeed the gradient for them to get into the building. We've obviously changed the front entrance to the building, which is now a very snazzy kind of sophisticated use of different sliding doors that is far better than the previous entrance, which actually, if you were a wheelchair user, you would not have been able to get into the building independently. You'd have had to have somebody assist you. So again, far better improvements there too. But generally speaking, though, the car park is still a car park. I think the key for me is about the plan, the long-term plan. And whilst we know that the swimming pool will be good for another 20 years and that will be somebody else's job, not mine, to redo again or to be involved in redoing again, and indeed the sports hall floors, barring any major catastrophes, or indeed the roof or whatever it might be with the weather or the climate, then yeah, we've been through a period of the last sort of 2 or 3, 4 years of quite a lot of work in effectively creating a brand new national sports centre, which should see it okay for the next sort of 2 decades.
The MEA and the NSC buildings have been featured tonight in Bob Into Buildings. You can listen again to tonight's programme, plus previous programmes in this second series, and also the first series as podcasts at manxradio.com. I'll be back next week at the same time for the last in the present series to again focus on some of the island's most familiar buildings. So from me, Bob Harrison, good evening.